Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Marty Ross, and this is another Conversations with Marty Ross MD tonight. It's a webinar where we talk about Lyme disease. As I often say, no two webinars are exactly the same because each one's different because you create it with your questions. So please ask questions. And I see a number of people have already posted questions here tonight. For those of you that have not participated before, one of the ways you can participate is to ask questions. And the way you do that is over here on the bottom of the screen on the right-hand side is a chat box that you can write your questions to me. The one thing I ask as you're writing your question is do not hit the enter key until the whole question is complete. Keep in mind that each time you hit the enter key, it actually sends a separate question my direction. During the webinar tonight, I am creating a recording. So if you happen to miss something, it should be available for you to hear tomorrow morning. I try to get the recording put together for everyone somewhere by around 8:30 to 9 o'clock in the morning. I'm going to stop trying to give a fast time that I'm going to get those out to you, but it'll be sometime earlier in the morning between around 8:30 and 9 o'clock Central Standard Time here in Austin is when I'll try to get that out to you. And that is if the recording goes correctly and if I'm able to get it edited correctly as well too. The other thing is just another piece of business keeping. There will be one more webinar this month, and that is next week. I'll be doing that. And then we'll be into March. I may go right away into March without taking a week break. I have actually been off for a couple weeks here, so it'd be time to go ahead and maybe do a few more of these in a row to help out. During the webinar tonight, I am going to be creating a recording, but the one thing I'm also going to do is I'm going to do some screen sharing for you so you can actually see resources that I have on my Lyme disease information site, which is called Treat Lyme, and also options for supplements at my supplement store, which is Marty Ross MD Supplements. So with no further ado, let's go ahead and get started. Oh, one more thing. During the webinar, I am going to post your questions on the screen. So those of you that are here participating live will actually be able to see the question. I will read the question, so, and the reason I'm going to do that is in the recorded version of the webinars, the questions don't show up, okay? So I have to read them so people can understand what we're talking about, all right? All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. All right. Hello, Kay. Let's see. Kay, looks like you got a number of questions. I'll probably try to go through these fairly quickly, although as many of you know, I can get kind of long-winded with some of these questions too. So we'll see what we can do here. Some people insist that what we call chronic Lyme is actually herpes virus. Is this true? So I'm going to just read these one question at a time, answer it, and then go on to the next question, okay? So no, chronic Lyme disease is caused by a bacteria which is called the Borrelia bacteria, which is not a herpes virus, okay? Now, having said that, both herpes viruses, chronic herpes virus infections, and chronic Lyme disease may look similar to each other. And the reason they may look similar to each other is both can cause an overproduction by the immune system, a group of white blood cells that fight infections of a group of chemicals called cytokines, okay? Now, cytokines, many of you know I talk about often, and I write a lot about on my website too, but cytokines are chemicals that are good and bad. When white blood cells see an infection, whether it's bacteria, whether it's virus, whether it's a parasite, or if they see toxins in you, white blood cells, to get rid of those invaders, as I call them, will produce these things called cytokines. Cytokines are good and bad. On the good side, they cause more white blood cells to be made. They draw those white blood cells to where the infection is, and they help those white blood cells work better, okay? But in situations where the immune system is having a hard time getting rid of that invader, it'll make more and more cytokines, okay? So you can get into a situation where you have excess cytokines. And too many cytokines in you can make it so you can't sleep. They can make you hurt all over. They give you fatigue. They make it difficult to think. They can interfere with how your hormonal systems work. Sounds like Lyme disease, doesn't it? So anything that triggers excess cytokines can give that similar kind of reaction, okay? But technically, Lyme and herpes virus are totally different things, okay? All right. Number two, is the VCS test a good indicator of the presence of Lyme? So VCS stands for Visual Contrast Study, okay? And it's a visual exam test that is done. What it does, it looks to see if you're able to distinguish between shades of black, gray, and white, all right? And what has been found, and this is a test that was actually developed by the military, is that if you have excess levels of toxins in you, you may have a hard time just making the distinctions between those black, white, and gray colors on the test, all right? So the visual contrast study is actually a test we can use to screen for mold toxin illness, all right? And that's more often of where it's used is actually in screening for mold toxin illness. If you're looking for a place that you can actually do that, it's something that can be done online. The place that you can do it is at a website called survivingmold.com. It's a website hosted by a physician named Richie Shoemaker, who's kind of one of the founders of the ideas that many of us have around what is mold toxicity illness and treating mold toxicity, okay? And you could do that test there. Now, it is not a perfect test to figure out if you have mold toxin illness, but if it is abnormal, it can indicate it. And also, but just be aware, you can have mold toxin illness and still have a normal visual contrast study. Okay, so it's not a perfect screening test, all right? All right, number 3, what's your opinion about cordyceps mushrooms? So cordyceps is a mushroom that can help the immune system, might even help the adrenals work well. I use other mushrooms or other ways of helping the adrenals and the immune system, but cordyceps is something that could do that. Let's see, can some people have Borrelia in them and still be asymptomatic even without any antibiotic treatment? Is it a matter of having a stronger immune system that allows them to be asymptomatic? So yes, the answer is yes. So it is not everyone that gets Lyme infections in them will develop Lyme disease, okay? Dis-ease, that's what disease means. It means that there's a balance that's out of whack, that you start feeling the effects of having some type of an infection in you. So some of us, when we get Lyme infections, our immune systems may be able to get rid of it without ever using an antibiotic. That's possible. The other thing that can happen is some of us have immune systems that may allow that germ to live in us, but will cohabitate with it. We live with it because our immune systems do a good job of keeping it under control, all right? Now, that may raise the question for some of you, do you need to treat if you have no symptoms of Lyme, even if you have the germ in you? And I take the opinion that no. And the reason I take that opinion that you don't need to treat is there is the possibility that anytime we use antibiotics for Lyme, it's weighing out risk and benefits, okay? One of the obvious benefits is if you have Lyme in you, we would use antibiotics to help you get better. But if you're already feeling well, what's that? There's no benefit in using the antibiotics, okay? The other problem with Lyme is if we treat somebody that's completely well with antibiotics, if somebody has had Lyme in them for a year or more, most of us that treat Lyme don't believe we ever get rid of it with antibiotics, okay? The best we could do is get people so they feel better. We knock down the germ load enough that it's not triggering all these excess cytokines and causing all the problems, all right? So there's no sense in using antibiotics to get you to a good place if you're already at that good place, all right? The third problem that can happen if you use antibiotics, and again, there's a time and place to use them, but if we use them, we may trigger the germ to become more virulent, stronger. It may learn resistance to those antibiotics, and it may go more into cyst forms, and it may go into persister communities that become harder to treat and harder for your immune system to deal with, and then the germ could become more active. I mean, that's possible, okay? So I take the view that if you're feeling well, even if you have evidence of a Lyme germ in you, I usually take the view, don't treat. That's just my standpoint on it, okay? All right, number 5, is it possible to have lingering Lyme symptoms if every last bacteria has been eliminated? And the answer to that question is yes. It is possible that even if the germ is out of you or knocked down adequately, that the germ will have created injuries to your tissues and injuries to your organs, okay? So it's possible that even with the germ under control, or even out of you, if you happen to be one of those people that gets treated right away and you knock the germ out of you, it's possible to have lingering symptoms due to ongoing injury from having had the germ active in you or having had the germ in you. Okay? All right. Whew, that's a lot of questions. I hope that answers all your questions there, Kay. Thank you for that. Hello, Justin. Good evening, Dr. Ross. Thank you so much for these webinars. You're welcome. They are valuable in my treatment. I'm following your steps to treatment for Lyme, Babesia co-infection, and supporting treatment with the Mito food plan diet, sleep, probiotics, liposomal glutathione, vitamins, and curcumin. So it sounds like you're following a lot of the steps in my Ross Lyme support protocol, my Lyme disease treatment guideline. For those of you that aren't familiar with that, I'll show that to you here in a minute. Let's see. Here is where I am. Biocidin LSF for about 14 months. So biocidin everyone is something I believe that based on studies is very helpful in treating the Lyme germ and may have the ability to actually kill the Lyme germ based upon what the individual herbs can do on Petri dish experiments. And I think clinically, it does a good job of killing the Lyme germ as well, too, based on what I have seen when I was treating patients with Lyme. My clinical experience says that it probably works very well for that, okay? Atovaquone, Proquenil 2 times a day with azithromycin 1 times a day for 6 months. That's treating Babesia, and that's a good combination to treat Babesia. And for the last 2 months of the 6 months, I added wild craft herbs, Cryptolepis, 2 tablespoons a day, and rifampin 600 milligrams every morning. I'm stopping the atovaquone, Proquenil, and azithromycin. I feel the Babesia side of the treatment is finished. I feel a little better, but hardly well, and I'm concerned about yeast infection. So to continue Lyme treatment, I'm starting a pulse regimen. Do I pulse biocidin and Cryptolepis? What do you recommend I pulse with rifampin? Thank you, and I wish everyone the best of luck in this terrible struggle. Okay, so generally when we treat Babesia, okay, and that's what the atovaquone and Proquenil was doing in combination with the azithromycin, and also that is what Cryptolepis treats, okay. Generally, I don't think it's a good idea to pulse antibiotics that are treating the co-infection Babesia or the co-infection Bartonella. And the reason I don't believe it's a good idea to pulse for those 2 germs is that they replicate fast. So for instance, the Bartonella germ, studies suggest that it replicates every 24 hours. So during the time period that you actually are off of the antibiotic, guess what's coming back? The germ, okay? Pulsing makes more sense actually for the Lyme germ because Lyme is very slow growing. So you can kind of do a hit and run where you use the antibiotics for a bit, stop them, and then treat them again, okay? And also, I agree with your idea that if you pulse antibiotics, that you're gonna have less of a chance of yeast being there, or yeast may be a bit easier for you to manage, all right? But what I'm not clear, and I can't tell from what you've written here, is do you have any symptoms suggesting Babesia? If you do, then you might wanna keep up with the Cryptolepis. If you don't, generally 5 months of treating for Babesia is adequate to get rid of Babesia, all right? And the only thing you can do is look at, see what are those, do you still have Babesia symptoms? Do you have enough symptoms of Babesia to suggest you have Babesia, in which case you may still want to keep treating, okay? And that would be what I would do with somebody in my practice in that kind of situation. But I can't give you specific advice because I can't tell for sure whether you've got active Babesia there or not. In terms of the rifampin, so the azithromycin and rifampin together would be both an effective treatment for Bartonella and would be an effective treatment for the Lyme germ, okay? Azithromycin would treat the spirochete form of Lyme and could treat Lyme that lives inside of cells. Rifampin can treat cyst Lyme and can treat Lyme that lives inside of cells too, all right? Also, that combination seems to be a good one for Bartonella. So I'm unclear as to why you added the rifampin here or not, okay? Let's see, do I pulse biocidin Cryptolepis? Again, I think if you're questioning if yeast is there, I would suggest treating for yeast. But you're going to need to determine either, by looking at some of the information I have on my website, whether you have yeast or not, or discuss it with your physician to see if they can help you with that. But if you think you have yeast, and if you're done with Babesia, and if you're not treating Bartonella, it would be okay to pulse the antibiotics, right? And though you might want to look at options to treat for the yeast as well too, okay? There's a lot of unknowns that I just can't give you specific advice because I don't know enough of what's happening here symptom-wise with you to help determine what is active or not active in you, all right? So I'm going to just do a quick screech here. I'm going to show you some things to take a look at. All right, so this is Marty Ross MD supplements. It's one of the websites that I run. Many of you know about that. If you're looking for a source for supplements that I have handpicked to help people with Lyme, this is a place you can look for them. It's at treatlyme.com. Okay. And then, excuse me, this is my Lyme disease information site, Treat Lyme by Marty Ross MD. In terms of trying to figure out if you might have too many yeast and then what to do about those too many yeast, take a look at my chapter in my online guide called Yeast, okay? And then you might want to look at this article called A Silent Problem, Do You Have Yeast? It gives you some information you can use to figure out if you might have too many yeast. And if you do have too many yeast, then take a look at this article called Kills Yeast, a brief guide. It gives you ideas that you can use to treat yeast, okay? All right, then in terms of figuring out if you still have active Babesia or if you have Bartonella, take a look at this chapter called How to Diagnose. And in here, I've got an article called It Could Be Bartonella or Babesia, the Symptoms and Signs. Just look through the various symptoms. I'm not a big believer in testing for either one of these infections because there's too great of a chance that you might have the infection and the testing won't pick it up. And the reason is we estimate that there's about 28 to 30 strains of Bartonella, of which 17 are thought to infect humans, but we can only test for 2. In other words, Bartonella testing will miss a large number of the strains that you may have. So for Bartonella, you've got to look and see, do you have enough symptoms that suggest it, okay? Babesia is the same thing. We estimate somewhere around 15 strains or more of Babesia. Testing is good for maybe about 2 strains. So again, you could have Babesia and still have negative testing. So when I was treating Lyme patients, and what I still believe is that if you're going to make decisions to treat for Bartonella or Babesia, you should make those decisions based on what the testing actually shows you. Okay? All right. Let's see here. I'm trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to show you here. Nope, I think those are the big things. Okay. Oh, one last thing. For those of you that wonder where you're coming up with these, so back to my treatment protocol. Okay, so this is my Lyme disease treatment guidelines page, and it's the Ross Lyme support protocol. And actually, I've just been through this over the last day or two. I've been cleaning it up, editing, and making a few adjustments in it. So if you haven't seen this for a while, you may want to come back and re-look at it again. But it talks about the key things to do during a treatment. It says you've got to get sleep. That helps the immune system work better, and it gives you ideas on what to do for that. Talks about one of the best diets that I think you can do when you have Lyme, and that is a paleo-type diet, which is at this article right here, the best brain inflammation, pain, energy, and detox diet ever. That is a diet called the Mito Food Plan that you asked about in your question, okay? Third thing I always suggest people do is do something to lower those cytokines that I was talking about earlier. And in this article, I give you some ideas on what you can do, or this section, I give you some ideas about what you could do that. You were using the curcumin to do that. The other thing I do is I suggest that people be on something that is known as an adaptogen. Adaptogens help the body to deal with stress, okay? Fifth thing I suggest people do is correct hormonal insufficiencies and problems. And I walk you through here how you would figure that out. I recommend generally people be on a good multivitamin. I recommend taking some basic steps to do detox, which can include using the glutathione that you mentioned. And I talk about treatments for yeast here. And then finally, I talk about recommended treatments for Lyme. And I recommend treatments for the co-infections, okay? So those are kind of the big 12 steps of my treatment protocol. For anyone that has not looked at it or hasn't looked at it in a while, I'd suggest you come back and relook at it again. These are the key things that I find that can be very helpful for people to recover from Lyme disease, okay? All right. All right, so thanks for that question, Justin. Good luck to you. All right. All right. Hello, Megan. Let's see. So it looks like a longer question here. Let me see what we can do with this. Hello, Dr. Ross. Thank you again for all that you do. You're welcome. Your time and efforts to do these webinars and all your resources are truly such a gift. Thank you. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. Question number 1. In your tier 1 approach to treating Bartonella, is there any combination of antibiotics that you feel is most effective? I read that the rifampin is bactericidal, but Zithromax and Bactrim are just bacteriostatic. Should a bactericidal and bacteriostatic always be combined for best results? Along those lines, is clarithromycin bacteriostatic or bactericidal with Bartonella? Okay, so what those words bacteriostatic and bactericidal mean is, bactericidal means the antibiotic has the ability to kill the germ outright. Okay, it damages it. Okay. Bacteriostatic antibiotics are ones that work by slowing the growth of the germ in a way so it has a hard time growing and eventually it kind of like withers and dies on the vine, if you will. Okay. What I will tell you is in the world of Bartonella, there have not been any studies done that would say what is the best way to treat with bacteriostatic or bactericidal antibiotics. There's no studies to guide us there. What I can tell you is that what the research would suggest is that using at least 2 antibiotics, whether they're bacteriostatic or bactericidal, is what seems to work best. In other words, the research doesn't make any distinction between bactericidal or bacteriostatic. And in my practice, when I was treating patients for Bartonella, I didn't make any distinctions either. I just found that it was more useful to use a combination of any 2 antibiotics that could get inside of the cells where Bartonella lives to kill it, okay? So the other part of your question is, do I find any of my tier 1 approaches better? The answer is no. They're all tier 1 approaches. They all have the same relative ability to work, okay? So for those of you that wonder what a tier 1 approach is, I'll show you in just a minute, okay? It's an article that I have about how do you kill Bartonella. Okay, number 2, I've only taken 1 dose of 150 milligrams of rifampin, but experienced gas, abdominal pain, lots of nausea, and headache. The nausea and headache are still lingering strong 21 hours after that single dose. Are these reactions, side effects, something you see subside after the body becomes accustomed to the new medication and it just requires adaptation over time, or is it likely an indication this drug is not a good fit? Do you see this frequently with rifampin? I'm taking probiotics and probiotics, but still experiencing these effects. So I would be concerned. My experience is when I manage patients with Lyme, if I had somebody that had a lot of headaches, nausea, and abdominal pain on rifampin, I rarely found a person whose system would get used to that or that their body would adapt to being on the rifampin and those side effects would go away. I would suggest, based on my experience, that is a combination or that medicine is something you may not be able to tolerate, unfortunately, okay? Number 3, if using antibiotics to kill Bartonella, do we also need to use an additional biofilm disruptor supplements or an agent like biocidin to ensure the Bartonella's efflux pump is disabled? So in terms of biofilms, the one thing I want to point out is, although there are specific agents that you can use that have been shown in either petri dish experiments or in humans to have benefit at breaking down biofilms. Biofilms are a layer of slime that can cover germs and block out the immune system, potentially block out antibiotics. Okay, that's what biofilms are. What is interesting about biofilms, though, is that research tells us that most antibiotics have the ability to break down biofilms to a degree. All right. Now, I know we don't hear about that, but the research says they can to a degree. Now, in some people, that's just enough. The antibiotics are enough to break down the biofilms to a degree that they're going to get well. And in fact, before we had a lot of research over the last 5 years or so suggesting that biofilms is a major problem in Lyme, my approach to managing Lyme, my approach to managing Bartonella, my approach to managing Babesia was never to give something specific for biofilms, and people got better anyhow, okay? So my approach with things that disrupt biofilms specifically beyond using prescription or herbal antibiotics, my approach is to consider adding a specific biofilm breaker If you're about 6 to 9 months into treatment and generally you're just not getting better, then I might add in a biofilm breaker is another step you can do to try to move the treatment along, okay? And biofilm breakers that I have used successfully in my practice include lumbar kinase, can include the biocidin that you wrote about, could include a combination of enzymes. For instance, there's a product by Research Nutritionals called BioDisrupt. I think it's called BioDisrupt, that is made up of a bunch of different a variety of enzymes that may have benefit at breaking down biofilms. Okay, so I would consider using one of those, but I would add it in at, say, about 6 to 9 months into treatment. Okay. All right. Number 4, do you feel that it is necessary to address all heavy metal and or mold toxicity prior to initiating treatment with antibiotics for Bartonella, or can it be done concurrently? They all can be done concurrently. I have done that before in my practice. The only situation where I might make a move for going after heavy metals first or mold toxins first is if, in talking to a patient, I get a clear history from them that even though they have symptoms of Bartonella or Lyme, or they have testing saying they have Bartonella or Lyme, if I get a strong history that their health was in great shape until they moved into the house that had obvious mold, and that's where they got sick, that's the type of situation where I might treat for mold toxicity first, and often don't even need to do anything for the Lyme then, because often just getting the mold toxins out causes all those cytokines to fall down and a person doesn't feel sick anymore, okay? A similar situation, I've occasionally in my practice would have a person that when I took a detailed history from them, I found there was significant risk of heavy metal exposures, and it was while they were getting all those heavy metal exposures that they got sick. In that kind of a situation, I might go and do heavy metal detox first before we ever approach treating the infections, because again, we just might not need to treat the infections. Just getting the heavy metals out could be enough, okay? All right. Good luck to you, Megan. Thank you for that question. Hello, Colleen. Let's see. A few years ago, I was off the charts toxic for mercury based on a hair sample test. Then I got my amalgams removed and did chelation. A year later, the same testing said my mercury was now at a safe level. The biological dentist suggested I never eat fish again, even crustaceans or small fish. What's your opinion about eating fish or shellfish? Because of toxicity, I've read Lyme bacteria loves mercury. Thank you for your help. So the only thing I would say, I don't know that I necessarily agree with your biological dentist, okay? I will say, so in other words, the fact that you had mercury toxicity does not make you any more susceptible than anyone else to getting mercury toxicity again. Your mercury toxicity may have come from various exposures that you had over time, okay? And you may not have a lot of those now. One source, though, an ongoing source for mercury toxicity is ocean fish, unfortunately, and especially tuna. Tuna is known to have quite a bit of mercury in it. So I don't know. I might, if I had a situation where I had a patient like you, I might consider suggesting to them that they avoid having a tuna. I don't know that I would avoid other sources necessarily. I think I'd still have patients have salmon. I would, et cetera. Okay, I would consider doing all that. All right. And this statement, I've read Lyme bacteria loves mercury. I don't know I don't know that we really have any proof of that. I think that's opinion. And so I can't say that that's true or not true. Okay. All right. All right. Good luck to you. Thanks for that question, Colleen. Oh, in terms of other fish, I think your only fish, not all crustacean fish or shellfish, but I think your main concern would be tuna. Because tuna is just, it is historically has a lot of mercury in it. Okay. All right. Hello, Heather. Hi, Dr. Ross. I started low-dose naltrexone, LDN, 2 weeks ago and feel terrible. I'm only on 0.1 milligram. Is this a sign my body is fighting the Lyme, or is LDN just not for me? How long should I give it? Also, a doctor told me if I have issues with mold, LDN will prevent me from detoxing mold. Have you heard this? Unsure of how to proceed, and I'm the first person my doctor has prescribed LDN to. Thanks. Okay. So, first of all, LDN, everyone, stands for low dose naltrexone. Naltrexone is a prescription medicine that is made as a 50 milligram pill, but we can use it in a form of something called low dose naltrexone, which means that we have a compounding pharmacy mix it up into smaller doses than the 50 milligram pill. Okay. And typically we'll start at about 1.5 milligrams a day. And over about a 4 week period of time, try to work up to 4.5 milligrams one time a day. Okay, that's in general, right? What we know is that if we block those endorphin receptors, what naltrexone does is it's a narcotic receptor blocker. It blocks narcotic receptors, and we have a natural kind of narcotic receptors in our body called endorphins. All right. And our body manufactures endorphins to regulate pain, but endorphins also regulate the immune system. If we provide a temporary blockade of those endorphin receptors, one thing that can happen is those endorphin receptors will become more sensitive to the existing endorphins, all right? And in addition, the brain sends out a bunch of signals to the endorphin producing cells that says, hey, we're under blockade, make more, all right? So while your endorphin receptors are being blocked by naltrexone, what happens is they become more sensitive to the endorphins, and your brain triggers a lot more to be made, so that when the naltrexone wears off at about 4 to 6 hours after you took your pill, those receptors get flooded, and it has the ability to actually regulate the immune system so that it is less prone to attack you and cause autoimmune illness, for instance, okay? Also, at the brain level, doing that kind of blockade has a way of regulating pain receptors so that we have less fibromyalgia type like pain throughout the body as well too. All right, so it can be useful for pain management as well too. Now, there is an occasional patient I found in my practice that was very, very sensitive to naltrexone and might not be able to take it. For those type of patients, I would decrease the dose down to 1.1 milligram a day, which is where you are. I would say that, and sometimes if a person was really sensitive, I would try to see if they might stay on it for a couple weeks. But if after a couple weeks, even at very low doses, they were not able to tolerate it, I would consider not using it in them. That is what I would wind up doing. Now, the only thing you might want to try that I have occasionally done with some of my patients is to even go less than 0.1 milligrams. Start at a half of a 0.1 milligram, for instance, okay? But I'm questioning if you're going to be able to actually do the low dose naltrexone, given the type of reactions that you're having with it at this point, okay? Let's see here. And I don't agree with the idea that LDN is going to help you from detoxing mold. LDN has nothing to do with your detox mechanisms at all. Okay? All right. All right. Good luck to you. Sorry you're having such a hard time with that medicine. All right. So for those of you that want more information about low-dose naltrexone, as is the case with most of the things I'm discussing with you tonight, I've written something about that. All right. So if you want to find my article about low-dose naltrexone, you can find it one of two places. I think I have it in the pain chapter. Yep, there it is. LDN for Lyme. Okay. The other place you can find it is in my immune system chapter as well too. All right. But take a look at this. It's a very good overview of low-dose naltrexone. Okay. All right. Let's see here. All right. Hello, Michelle. Let's see. I have a question regarding my 16-year-old son. He was bit in Pennsylvania by 2 ticks in 2015. The ticks tested positive for Lyme. His IGeneX Western blot done in February of 2016 was negative. IgM bands 41 and 8393 indeterminate. And IgG 41 positive. Based on the bands above and a clinical exam by a Lyme literate medical doctor, my son began treatment for Lyme and Babesia. I'm confused by what you mean by the IgM pattern here, but let me keep reading here. It may become clear to me. Let's see. I have also used Buhner's herbal protocol. Over these few years, my son has had great healing with a few lingering symptoms, which led us to a new Lyme literate medical doctor in a different state. My son began using Biocidin last summer, 2018, and the last symptoms faded away. Our new Lyme literate medical doctor said to stop the Biocidin, so I began to decrease the dose just a few weeks ago, and my son's symptoms began to return. I called the Lyme literate medical doctor to report this, and he said to stop the Biocidin anyway to see what happens. So my question is, what would you advise us to do in this situation? I have not followed the Lyme literate medical doctor's advice, and they put my son back on the full dose of Biocidin. But now those last symptoms that went away are back. The new Lyme literate medical doctor even made a comment at our last appointment. He wasn't even sure my son has Lyme. I feel discouraged and don't know what to do. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much for your time and for everything you do. All right, so I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to give you a good answer here. Part of the problem is I need to know more specifically about what symptoms your son had before. What are the symptoms now? I would need to do a lot of questioning of you to help figure out, is there Lyme here or not? The other thing is I don't understand the way that you're telling me about the IgM pattern. As I read that question, you said that it was the IgM was negative and that the bands 41 and 8391 were indeterminate. So I think what you're saying is that they reported the IgM as negative and that bands 41 and 8393 were indeterminate. And I don't know that that supports a Lyme disease diagnosis. Now, what I would tell you, though, is making a diagnosis of Lyme means considering a number of things. It's like putting together the pieces of a puzzle, okay? One thing that we always consider is there a risk of getting it, okay? So a tick bite in Pennsylvania, that's a big risk. Second thing we consider is, what do the symptoms say? Do the symptoms suggest Lyme? And I just don't know. I can't tell from the question as you're writing it here, basically, okay? The third thing is are there any physical exam findings? And again, I don't have the benefit of doing that here. And then the fourth thing is there a supportive test? And from what you've just described here, I cannot say that that's a supportive positive or a supportive negative test. It's in between, actually, okay? So for all those reasons, I can't give you advice here. I would need to actually do more of a discussion with you, of which I'm just not in a position to do here in the webinar, okay? All right. Good luck to you, Michelle. Good luck to your son. I'd suggest talking to the Lyme literate medical doctor again, okay? All right. Hello, Katie. Let's see. If someone has a yeast problem, is it okay to take Saccharomyces boulardii? Yes, it is. So when somebody has a yeast problem, usually what we're talking about is having too much of a yeast called Candida albicans. Okay, that's the kind of yeast that can grow in females' vaginas. It can also overgrow within the intestinal tract and give people a lot of yeast overgrowth problems. On the other hand, Saccharomyces boulardii, which is also a yeast, is a good yeast, okay? It tends not to give those problems. And it is okay to take it. In fact, it might help compete to take over territory from the bad yeast, which would be the Candida albicans. So yes, it is okay to take it. All right, thank you. Thanks for that question. Hello, Dana or Dana. Obviously, I can't tell the pronunciation from here. Hold on just a minute. Let's see. To fight Babesia, our doctor is only prescribing Malarone 3 days on and 4 days off. Have you seen success with this type of protocol? No, I haven't. And as I was mentioning earlier tonight, I tend to be in the school that says that you treat Babesia continuously. And that is because, in my opinion, Babesia replicates fast and will come back on those days that you're off. I had found when I was practicing and treating people with Lyme that using a treatment continuously gave the best chances for somebody to get better from it. So I don't agree with that type of an approach. All right. Good luck to you, Dana. Dana, actually, so what you may want to do is, for more information about this and to give you some ideas that you might want to talk with your healthcare provider about, you may want to take a look again. This is my Treat Lyme website, okay? Take a look at the page called Infection Treatment Plans. And in here is an article I have called Kills Babesia, a Brief Guide, okay? Take a look at this article. It gives you recommendations on ways to approach getting rid of Babesia. And again, I suggest using the antimicrobials continuously because the germ replicates so quickly. Okay. All right. Good luck to you. Let's see. Hello, Jeffrey. I have 1 month of minocycline and rifampin. Will that be enough to treat Bartonella? And what are the generic names of herbs used to treat Babesia? All right. So generally, Jeffrey, what I have found in my practice in treating Bartonella is that the greatest likelihood of getting rid of Bartonella and the amount of time it takes to get rid of Bartonella when you also have Lyme at the same time is about 4 to 6 months of treatment. All right. So I can't say for sure that 1 month won't work, but I rarely saw somebody that 1 month of treatment was enough to get rid of Bartonella. Okay. In terms of herbs that you can use to treat Babesia, I would take a look at that Kills Babesia, a Brief Guide that I just showed everyone here just a few minutes ago. And in there, I mentioned 2 herbs. One is called Cryptolepis and another one called Artemisinin. If you read that article, I tell you how to use both of those herbs. Keep in mind that Artemisinin may not be so effective against Babesia that's acquired on the East Coast. For some reason, it seems, at least clinically, that people that have acquired Babesia on the East Coast do not do as well with their treatment when you include or when you use Artemisinin. It seems the germs out there seem to be learning some resistance to it, okay? But you can see a whole discussion about that in my article on Babesia that I showed everyone a few minutes ago. All right. Good luck to you. Let's see. From Jeffrey again here. Let's see. Do you know of any testing that can be done with Candida's testing protocols to diagnose, or Canada's testing protocols to diagnose Babesia or Bartonella? So again, I'm not a big, I mentioned earlier tonight, and you could look back at some of those articles that I showed you. Actually, I'll show you again here. But the problem with testing for both Bartonella and Babesia is we have too many strains that are not detected. Testing. It doesn't matter whether you're doing that testing here in the States, in Europe, in Canada. It just doesn't matter, okay? So generally, I'm a big proponent of treating for those infections based on symptoms in Lyme disease because testing is not fully reliable, all right? So I'm just going to do another quick screen share here just to show you that again. All right, so back in my Treat Lyme site, take a look at my online Lyme guide and look at the infection. Actually, look at the how to diagnose section here. I'm moving my cursor over it. And you would want to take a look at this article called "It Could Be Bartonella Babesia: The Symptoms and Signs." Okay. All right. All right. Good luck to you, Jeffrey. Hello, Susan. Let's see. I tested positive for IgG 39 and IgG 41, plus positive for Q fever, very low titers. My Lyme medical doctor is testing for all co-infections in Lyme. Would you do the same? So again, first of all, that IgG 39 and 41 pattern that you have, I interpret as being a positive Lyme test, okay? So everyone, when we do a test called a Western blot for Lyme, a Western blot is a method we use to see has your immune system made antibodies that attach to certain proteins that are found on the covering of the germ. And in the Western blot test, we identify those proteins by what they weigh, all right? So there's a protein that makes found on the covering of the Lyme germ that weighs 39 kilodaltons. There's another one that weighs 41 kilodaltons, and we call those band 39 and band 41, all right? Now, when IGeneX does their Western blot test, they're looking to see if you have antibodies against 12 proteins. And of those 12, there are 6 that seem to give us a greater indication that you have Lyme if antibodies are stuck on those proteins. The reason we focus on those 6 proteins is there's always a small chance that when an antibody sticks on a Lyme protein, that it really was an antibody made against another infection that just happens to cross-react with the Lyme proteins. But on these 6 specific proteins, the 6 important ones, there is a very, very small chance to non-existent chance that it would be because of another infection, especially if you have antibodies against 2, okay? So the 6 proteins we focus on are the one that's at location 23-25, 31, 34, 39, 41, and the 83-93, okay? And if you happen to have antibodies against 2 of those proteins, we call that a positive Lyme test. And that's the same standard we use either on the IgM or the IgG Western blot. Okay, that's if it's the test done by IGeneX or the test done by SUNY Stony Brook. Okay, now if your Western blot was done at a regular lab like LabCorp or Quest, they're using a diagnostic test kit that's approved by the Federal Food and Drug Administration with standards put out by the Centers for Disease Control. And on their test, they only look to see on the IgG if you have antibodies against 10 proteins, not the 12. And on the IgM, they only look to see if you have antibodies against 3 proteins on the IgM, not the 12 that IGeneX does, all right? Because IGeneX has a bigger fingerprint in their interpretation, if you will, they have a greater chance of finding Lyme. So the IGeneX methodology of doing a Western blot will find Lyme if you have it about 80% of the time. The Centers for Disease Control FDA test kit will find it if it's there about 60 to 65% of the time. All right. So that's why many of us have used the IGeneX methodology, because we think it does a better job finding the germ than what the Centers for Disease Control methodology does. All right. All right. So anyhow, what I would say is you have a positive test for Lyme. In terms of whether, and my opinion about testing for co-infections is they're not accurate. Again, with Bartonella, we estimate that there are between, there is about 28 strains, of which there's 17 that can infect humans, and we can only test for 2, all right? Babesia, we estimate 15 to 20 strains of Babesia. We can only test for 2 or 3, depending on the labs that you're using. So therefore, you can have those infections even with negative testing. So I generally would make my decisions to treat for those infections based on my clinical suspicion, based upon the symptoms. Do you have enough symptoms that suggest Babesia? Do you have enough symptoms that suggest Bartonella? Okay. And I already showed you the article tonight that you can look at for that. Okay. All right. In terms of Anaplasma and Ehrlichia, those are 2 of the other co-infections your doctor might be testing you for. The testing is fairly accurate on those, but generally we're going to think about those as being part of Lyme disease in a person that has a lot of temperature and a lot of muscle achiness component. Okay. And my approach would be that when I was treating patients, I actually never tested for the Anaplasma and Ehrlichia, because as part of my Lyme infection treatment, somewhere during the treatment, I would likely use the family of antibiotics called the tetracyclines, which is doxycycline, minocycline, to treat the Lyme germ. But about 2 weeks of using one of those antibiotics is going to be enough to get rid of your Anaplasma and Ehrlichia too. So I would just build in coverage treatment for those as part of treating Lyme, it would happen to pick up Anaplasma and Ehrlichia. Okay, all right. And then again, keep in mind, testing is only part of the puzzle. I mentioned that earlier tonight. There's 4 things we look at when we consider if you have Lyme disease, and testing could be wrong. It could be negative wrong. It could be positive wrong, okay? So you have to have enough symptoms that suggest Lyme. You have to have enough physical exam findings, and we need to consider whether you have a great enough risk of having gotten it as well too, okay? So I'm just going to do a quick screen share because it may be useful for people that are still questioning, do you really have Lyme? Take a look at my article that I have about how do you diagnose it, okay? And in fact, my article about how do you diagnose Lyme is called How Do You Diagnose Lyme More Than, oh, there it is. How do you like that? How to Diagnose Chronic Lyme Disease More Than a Test, okay? I hope you see that part there because it is more than a test, all right? So I would take a look at that article if you're questioning whether you really have Lyme disease or not, okay? All right. All right, Susan, thank you for that question. Good luck to you. Hello, Tina. See, what do you recommend for methotrexate relentless exhaustion side effects? I take it for late stage Lyme arthritis. Tina, I don't have an answer for you off the top of my head. I'm sorry on that one. I would need to study a little bit more of how methotrexate works so that I could understand what would be the best response for you on that. And I just don't know off the top of my head. Okay? All right. Sorry about that. Good luck to you. Hello, Randy. Let's see. I just found out I have 3 active viruses tested positive for Epstein-Barr, cytomegalovirus, and herpes virus type 6. I'm taking Tacuna 20 drops twice a day, Amazon CF along with Banderol, Cemento, and Pimpinella, 20 drops twice a day. Do you agree with all this? Will these kill the viruses? They're causing me a lot of fatigue and muscle weakness. All right. So let me just talk about viruses real quick as part of your question, all right? So again, these symptoms that we call Lyme disease symptoms can look very similar to chronic virus infections as well. I started out the webinar by talking about that there's a common thread in Lyme disease and a common thread in virus infections, and that is for some people, our immune systems get triggered to make too many cytokines by these, and those excess cytokines are what give you all of these symptoms that we call Lyme symptoms or even chronic virus infection symptoms, okay? All right, now, what gets tricky about chronic virus infections is trying to determine whether they really are causing something if they are in you, all right? So just having evidence of a chronic virus infection in you does not mean it's causing you a problem. I know that may sound kind of a hard thing to hear, but let me describe that a little bit more, okay? So there are a group of infections that can live and cohabitate in healthy people. All right. So we can have bacteria live in our skin. Guess what? We can have bacteria and viruses live inside of us too. And our immune system and most of us can keep those infections under control. All right. So for instance, there's been studies done looking at healthy people. If we were to pull like 100 healthy people off the street and we were to do blood testing, we would find evidence in about 10 to 20% of those people of having either one of the 5 following infections, okay? 2 bacteria. One is called Mycoplasma pneumoniae. The other one is called Chlamydia pneumoniae, okay? Now keep in mind, these are people that feel healthy and they still have evidence by measuring antibodies of having chlamydia or mycoplasma in them, okay? And then 3 viruses have been shown to occur in about 10 to 20% of people too, and that would be antibodies against human herpes virus type 6, cytomegalovirus, and the Epstein-Barr virus, all right? All right. So that means there's a lot of healthy people out there that have elevated antibodies against these infections. And all that it may mean is that your immune system is doing a great job keeping those infections under control. And it doesn't mean they're causing you a problem, because look, we can have healthy people living with elevated antibodies against these infections and they don't have problems with it. Okay. All right. Now, having said that, there was a study done probably about, I think somewhere in the last 7 to 10 years. I forget exactly when. And you can find the study. It's done by a physician named Montoya, Montoya, out of Stanford University. If you were to Google Montoya chronic fatigue syndrome study, chronic fatigue syndrome virus study, you would find probably his research. Okay. And what Montoya did is he was wondering, do people with significantly elevated antibodies against Epstein-Barr and human herpes virus type 6, those two together, would it be helpful if they did have marked elevations in those antibodies to actually treat for chronic virus infections? Okay. And what he found in his study is that people had great elevations in both Epstein-Barr and HHV6, that using an antiviral regimen of a drug called Valcyte for 6 months, that about 50% of people had improvements in some or some of their symptoms. Okay, that's what his study showed. All right, and so it may be true that based on that study, that if you have severe elevations in the antibodies against those viruses, that it is a sign that your immune system has lost the battle, that those infections have become part of your problem. All right. Now, however, I found while I was in practice what I think is a better way of determining if those viruses are active. And that is to measure a blood test. It's considered to be an experimental test, but it's to measure a blood test called nagalase. It's an enzyme called nagalase. There's a lab out of New Jersey called Health Diagnostics that has a nagalase blood test. And what I found is if somebody had a significant elevation of 1.2 or higher with that nagalase level, that I would have benefit by treating for chronic virus infections. Okay, so what's nagalase? Well, remember I said you can have these viruses living in you and your immune system makes antibodies to keep them under control. So just having antibodies against a virus doesn't mean it's causing a problem. What you're really concerned about is, have they gotten out of control? Are there too many viruses in you triggering problems? Okay. So nagalase is an indirect way of looking to see if you have too many active viruses. So nagalase is an enzyme that is made in the covering of viruses. And if you have more virus volume in you, have more viruses that are active, you're going to have a lot more nagalase in you. Okay. All right. So I would question anytime I have somebody that would come to see me in my practice and said they had chronic viruses, I would start over and get a nagalase test to say, do we really need to treat for viruses or not? Okay. And you might get a little bit of a clue from your antibodies, but I think a better way is to do the nagalase test. I'll show you an article I have about that. All right. So the approach you're using is one way you could go after viruses, but I would ask the other question is it truly a problem that you have viruses? Okay. So let me show you an article that you can take a look at to see more about that test. You might discuss it with your provider, and also the approaches I generally would use to treat chronic virus infections too. I'm going to do a screen share here. Let's see here. Let's go to the how to diagnose section. All right. So here's my article called How and When to Treat Chronic Viruses in Lyme, a brief guide. Okay. So I cover all of the information I was just telling you about. It is in this article. Even have a webinar about it. I talk about the nagalase testing and talk about various natural medicine approaches I would use. Generally, for my approaches, I usually would use olive leaf extract or monolaurin to kill the viruses. I know you're using some of the nutrimitic herbs to do that. But in addition to the killers, if you have active viruses, one thing I have found helpful is to use immune system supports that help target your immune system against viruses too. And that is to use either reishi mushrooms or something called transfer factors. And the transfer factor mix I like to use is something called transfer factor plasmic. It's down here. And the mushroom mixes I like using is reishi gano mushrooms. Those help target your immune system to fight the viruses. Okay. All right. So in addition to germ killers, if you really do have an active virus, take a look at this article, but if you really do have active virus infections, you might want to look at adding some immune support to help your immune system go after those viruses as well too. Okay? All right. Good luck to you, Randy. Thank you for that question. Oh, Jeffrey, let's see. Have you had success with GSE for Bartonella? I haven't used it for Bartonella. I wouldn't think of it as being something that works for Bartonella based on the mechanism of action. Okay? All right. Hello, CJ. Hi, Dr. Ross. Thanks for hosting this webinar. You're welcome. Could you explain the thyroid system, what role T3, T4, reverse T3, etc. play, and what the expanded lab tests mean? Particularly, I have normal tests after being on Nature-Throid for 1.5 years, except the reverse T3 is high. Any ideas? Yeah, okay. So, so just so you know, I have a very, very, very detailed article that you could take a look at later that explains some of this in greater detail than I'm going to be able to do here in the webinar, okay? But, so your thyroid gland sits up here in the neck, okay? And it makes a variety of hormones, of which the two major ones are called T4 and T3 thyroid, all right? Now, the thyroid hormones that are made up here get into the bloodstream and they go out into the tissues, all right? Inside our cells, the active form, the form of thyroid that helps our cells metabolism, helps our cells work correctly from an energy standpoint is actually T3, all right? What your thyroid makes is about 90% T4 and about 10% T3. And out in the tissues and in your cells, that T4 has got to be changed over to T3 because it's T3 that's active, all right? Now, T4 has two potential things it can do. It can either become T3 or it can become reverse T3, all right? And if you're building up too much reverse T3, that means you're probably not getting enough T3 over here, all right? And then some people believe what happens in chronic infection states is our body as a defense mechanism will try to slow down metabolism and go into hibernation by putting the brake on thyroid or T3 production by shunting more of it over into this reverse T3. Okay? So when reverse T3 is elevated, it can be a sign that you have subclinical low thyroid. And what can sometimes help with that condition is to give more T3 hormone, all right? Now, your Nature-Throid is a mix of T4 and T3. It's actually ground up thyroid gland, and a portion of that is T4 and a portion of that is T3. In a situation like this, if I had somebody that I was managing their thyroid and their reverse T3 was staying elevated even on Nature-Throid, I might add specifically, in addition to the amount of T3 in the Nature-Throid, I might prescribe separate T3 to them as well too. All right, you can either do that as a compounded version or you can do it as a standard prescription called Cytomel. All right, but that generally is what that can suggest: is elevated reverse T3 can mean that you still have some subclinical hypothyroidism. And one approach for that is to take additional T3 to overcome that. All right? Okay. But let me show you the whole article that you can look at, which is a little bit more detailed. I just kind of gave you the Cliff's version of it. But let me go ahead and show you over here. Did I get that right? Oh, actually, I got it. Hold on a minute. I'm seeing it on my side. I didn't set it up so you can see it on your side. Hold on here a minute. There we go. Okay, so this is back in the Lyme guide. Take a look at my chapter, my hormone chapter. There it is. Okay, and in here I talk about testing medicines and vitamins that support the thyroid. All right, it's a longer paper. I even mention it here, but it'll kind of give you the whole guide on that. All right. Okay. Let's go back here. All right. Thanks, CJ. I appreciate that question. Hello, Suzanne. Let's see. Thank you for all the hard work. What are your thoughts on Botox? So, Botox, as you know, is a botulinum toxin. Okay, it's a toxin made from a bacteria. And Botox can be used for cosmetic reasons. Okay, so we can inject it around the eyes, or we can inject it in other places where we've had wrinkles, and it can cause the muscles to relax in those areas and letting go of our crow's feet and our wrinkles. All right, so that's one purpose of Botox. But Botox also has been found to be helpful in certain people with certain types of migraines, sometimes doing Botox injections at various trigger points or sensitive points is a very useful headache treatment as well, too. All right. Now, I think it's valid to use Botox for either reasons, whether it's going to be used cosmetically or whether it's going to be used medically. I have not seen anyone in my practice who is using those types of therapies, usually through another doctor, because I didn't do those injections in my practice. I have not seen anyone have health declines related to their Lyme disease as a result of getting Botox injections or Botox treatments. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Suzanne. Thank you for that question. Let's see. This is from Jeffrey. Is rifampin hard on the liver? So one problem with rifampin is it can sometimes lead to elevated liver enzymes, which means liver inflammation. Okay. So the liver enzymes are a chemical called AST and ALT that we can look at on a blood test. When I would have somebody on rifampin or even antibiotics, I would routinely check liver function tests to see what does their AST and ALT show. I would be comfortable letting that number get to at least 2 times above normal before I would get concerned. So for instance, most labs have a normal range. So for instance, an AST for one lab, the lab may say that their normal range of AST is 20 to 40. Again, I want to keep it at 2 times the upper end of normal. So I would be okay letting it become up to 80. Okay. Now, when I had somebody on rifampin or somebody on other things that was starting to elevate their liver enzymes, I might put them on something to help support the liver. That could be being on glutathione as a supplement. Again, I like using a liposomal variety of it. I think many of you know that from reading some of my work. Liposomal means it's microscopically wrapped in fat to increase absorption. Glutathione is the master antioxidant detox chemical that is made in every one of our cells to limit damage to those cells, but also it's used by the liver to help detox. Okay, so it helps support the liver. All right. So you might do like a 5 milliliters one time a day of a liposomal glutathione. I like using a Research Nutritionals product for that called Trifortify Orange or Trifortify Watermelon. All right. If you don't want to use glutathione outright, you could take the building blocks, which would be something called N-acetylcysteine or alpha lipoic acid, or a combination of both of those. Both of those are treatments that can help support the liver and production of glutathione naturally. And dose range I would use on NAC would be 500 milligrams twice a day, actually 3 times a day. And alpha lipoic acid, I might do at about 350 milligrams twice a day. Those are the kind of recommendations I would use with my patients in my practice. Okay. All right. All right. Good luck to you, Jeffrey. Hello, Susan. Let's see. Have you seen a livedo reticularis in your former patients? If so, what co-infection is connected to much things? So no, I had not seen that, and I'm not aware of any of the co-infections being linked to that. It doesn't mean they're not. I'm just not aware of it. Okay. All right. Thanks, Susan. Bear with me here. I've got some people that just wrote really short things that are not making sense. So I'm just getting rid of those. All right, here we go. All right, let's see. Hi, Linda. Let's see. I live in a house with mold and clearly have issues with it and have Lyme disease. Cannot afford to move. Can I still get better with products and eating better? Boy, that's a tough one. It's hard to be well if you are a person that has mold toxicity issues. So keep in mind that 75% of people can live in houses with mold and not be bothered by them. However, 25% of people cannot. So what happens is in 25% of us, we're genetically set up in a way that our immune systems are not able to adequately break down and remove mold toxins from our bodies when we get exposed to them. So if when we're in a moldy environment, all molds make some kind of toxins, and we breathe them in, drink them in, or eat them in, basically, okay? And what happens is mold toxins get into our bloodstream, then they get absorbed into the bloodstream. And if we're one of the 75% where our immune systems are programmed correctly, our immune systems will break down those mold toxins, okay? It will tag them for removal and break them down, all right? Now, if we're one of the 25% where we're genetically programmed incorrectly, what happens is those mold toxins don't get broken down by the immune system, they don't get tagged. They go to the liver. The liver is not able to transform them into what's known as a water-based toxin. They come out of the liver still fat-based. They go out in the intestines, and they get reabsorbed back into the bloodstream. And so you get this endless loop of toxins that just keep recirculating, and those toxins trigger cytokines to be made, okay? All right. All right, so now one intervention you could do if you happen to be one of those 25% that have mold toxins in you that keep recirculating and can't get out of you because you're breathing them in from the environment, is to try to bind those toxins up in the intestines. And hopefully you can bind up enough to keep up with what's coming in at you from your environment. All right. And so it is possible. I can't say this would be your situation or not, but if you happen to have mold, if a person happens to have mold toxicity illness, sometimes you can use activated charcoal, or you can use bentonite clay, or you can use a combination of both to bind those toxins up in your intestines so that they don't get reabsorbed again. And in some ways, you can kind of keep up with what's coming in at you from the environment. All right. So ways that in a person that I would be treating that would have mold toxin illness, ways that I would use activated charcoal and bentonite clay is to take activated charcoal. It comes as a 500 milligram pill. Bentonite clay comes as a 500 milligram pill too. Some people, when you start binding up those toxins, it can flare them up. It triggers a cytokine flare, believe it or not. So usually you want to start slow. And so I'd start a person on either the activated charcoal or on a bentonite clay, 1 pill a day. After a couple of days, if they're handling that fine, I might go to 2 pills a day. If they're handling that fine after another couple of days, I might go to 3 pills a day. And after I work one of those up, I might add the other one in, all right? And eventually working all of them up to 3 times a day. Now, ideally, I'd like to shoot for 3 times a day. Some people, you can't do that. Some people, it flares them up too much and you got to go even lower than that, okay? But I would say you're going to have a hard time if you happen to be one of those 25%, okay? The only way to find out if you are one of those 25% is to do a urine test to see if you actually have too many toxins trapped in you, because you'll pee some of those out. in excess amounts, okay? The urine test I like to use is a test by a company called Real Time Labs. There's also another lab called Great Plains Labs that's doing a urine test for mold toxins as well too, okay? All right, let me show you an article I've written about this so you understand where I came up with these ideas, and it's something you can refer back to later as well too. All right, so back at treat Lyme again. And so in terms of mold toxin illness and environmental toxins, take a look at my chapter called on detoxification. It's here. Okay. And you would want to take a look at this article called Mold and Lyme Toxin Illness. And in here I talk about how to use those toxin binders that I was discussing with you, and also about how do you test for this problem as well too, okay? All right. Okay, good luck to you, Linda. Hello, Tina. Do you still do online consults? The answer is no, I don't. The reason is, as many of you know, I've moved from Seattle, Washington to Austin, Texas. And in Austin, Texas, I'm not licensed to practice medicine. So because of that, I'm not able to do a direct one-on-one care with a person, even in the form of an online consult, okay? All right. Thanks for the question, Tina. Good luck to you. Okay, Sybil, I see a really, really long question from you here that I'm not going to be able to answer. And the reason is it's too big for me to even post on the screen. It'll make it so that I can't see the rest of the questions on my side. So I'm not going to be able to answer that, okay, unfortunately. Hello, policy, NAD plus, what do you think about it? So NAD is I'll call it a chemical that is involved in the production of cell fuel. All right. So our energy factories have our cells all have an energy factory system made up of what are called mitochondria. So every cell in our body has somewhere between 300 to 400 mitochondria. And it's inside mitochondria where sugar and fat are burned through a bunch of chemical reactions and produce a cell fuel chemical called ATP. All right. And you need NAD and NADH to make to help mitochondria function and make ATP. All right. Now, NAD may help with that, but I think there are better ways of repairing mitochondria if your energy is low. And I will tell you, we're probably running a little bit short on time tonight. What I'm going to do, I'm going to refer you to an article I have about how do you repair your energy mitochondria factories, okay? But keep in mind that anyone that has had chronic infection for a while, the immune system, as part of getting rid of those infections, is making cytokines, or we talked about that earlier, but also overproducing a group of chemicals called oxidizing agents. And those oxidizing agents over time can damage fat cell membranes, okay? Or cell membranes that are made up of fats, and any membrane that is made up of fats, all right? So our cell coverings are made up of a double layer of fat. Our mitochondria membranes are made up of a double layer of fat. So often people with Lyme and chronic infections, chronic toxin issues, et cetera, have damage to the covering of the mitochondria due to oxidative agent damage. And what helps with that situation is not necessarily to give the NAD, but actually to repair the covering. And what does a good job of covering that, one of the first things I like using is to use something that would repair that covering, and that's to use the same kind of fat phospholipids that make up that covering. A product that has those fat phospholipids in it is a product called NT factor, okay? So I often will use NT factor to rebuild that covering. The other things I have found helpful is to actually lower the oxidizing agents inside of those mitochondria and outside, and that's to use glutathione. I sometimes also would like using CoQ10. And if somebody has a lot of, is somebody that's more of a vegetarian, I might actually have that person also take something called acetyl L-carnitine. Carnitine is a an amino acid substance that you get from meat, red meat. And if you don't have enough red meat, you're not going to have enough of it. Carnitine is used as a transport vehicle by mitochondria to get fat from the outside of the mitochondria into the inside of the mitochondria where it can be burned into cell fuel. Okay. So there's 4 things I might consider that I find better than using NADH or NAD. And that's NT factor, glutathione, and possibly considering using CoQ10 and carnitine. Okay. Let me show you the article where you can read more about that. Okay, so take a look at my chapter called Energy and Fatigue. And here's my article called Power Up Energy and Mitochondria. Okay, all right. All right. Thanks for the question, Paula. Let's see. Hi again, Jeffrey. Let's see. I just want to say thank you for taking time to answer our questions. You have restored some faith in health vectors. Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate that. As many of you know, I was treating patients for Lyme, and I'm not doing so anymore because of some negative actions taken against me by my medical board in Washington State. But that doesn't mean I was wrong. It just means that I'm limited in what I can do in terms of helping people directly. But this is one way I can still help. And I want to help as many people as I can with this devastating illness. And so I'm glad that I'm able to keep doing that by having these webinars and also my Lyme disease information site as well, too. All right. Thank you for saying that. I appreciate that. Let's see. Hold on here, doesn't it? Hi, Dr. Ross. Let's see. Here's more info regarding my son. IGeneX basically said he was negative for Lyme, but he had marked symptoms after tick bites, which led to our LMD to diagnose him with Lyme. These symptoms were extreme fatigue, rapid heart rate, small dot-like rash over the torso and arms, shortness of breath, sore throat, brain fog, poor concentration, sore knees, bug crawling feeling, night sweats, sleep problems, and general weakness. The symptoms that have come back since decreasing biocidin are fatigue, sore throat, brain fog, poor concentration, and bug crawling feeling. I hope that helps. So, Michelle, it is possible those symptoms are consistent with Lyme, but the other thing that you may want to look at that can look just like Lyme, especially after you've been on things that kill Lyme for a while, even if they're herbal treatments, is it's possible that you can develop an imbalance of yeast in your intestines that can trigger excess cytokines, creating a situation that looks just like your Lyme got active, okay? So, and I briefly mentioned that earlier tonight, but yes, biocidin is one of those things that might treat yeast, but sometimes it doesn't do well, and sometimes it allows yeast to grow too much in your intestines, okay? So if I've got somebody that is doing well and then gets worse, no matter what they're using for treating Lyme, one of the first things I wanted to do with my patients was always to try to figure out, did yeast in the intestines get active? Because if yeast in the intestines get overactive by those antimicrobials knocking down good bacteria, allowing yeast to grow, the immune system will see too many yeast being active in the intestines and react by making cytokines, okay? And as I mentioned earlier tonight, Lyme disease symptoms are actually excess cytokine symptoms, all right? So if you've got something else that's triggering excess cytokines in you, it can look a lot like Lyme. So one thing that I would suggest you do is take a look at the article I wrote about how do you diagnose yeast. I'll show it to you here again, and see, does that apply to your son? And if so, you might consider whether you need to treat yeast instead of going after the Lyme at this point. I would just look at that would be the first thing I would always look at in one of my patients. Okay. All right. So let me just show that article to you here real quick. All right. So take a look at my chapter on yeast. All right. And see this article called A Silent Problem. Do you have yeast? Okay. All right. Oh, and if you do have yeast, take a look at the other article beside it called Kills Yeast, a Brief Guide. Okay. All right. All right, everyone. That is it for me for tonight. It's been great being here with you again. We do have another webinar scheduled for next week. I hope you'll join me again to participate in that. Keep an eye open at your email tomorrow morning, somewhere between 8:30, 9:30ish, somewhere in the early part of the morning, Central Standard Time. I will send an email out to everyone announcing that the video recording is available. Through that email, you can also sign up for next week's webinar. But here in a minute, as we end the webinar, I will have this program take you back to Treat Lyme, my Treat Lyme website, where you could click on the link to sign up for the next webinar as well, too. Okay. Let's see here. Any other? Nope, I think that takes care of it. Anyhow, it's good visiting with everyone tonight. I look forward to seeing you all next week. And good luck, everyone, with your recovery. Take care.